In 1981, a co-worker arrived at an office apartment in Georgia, expecting a routine task, picking up a key. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. Cameron Menzies was born on June 12, 1960. She was a dedicated member of the First United Methodist Church in Sylacauga, Alabama. She pursued her education at Gadsden State College, where she enrolled in the School of Court Reporting. Cam secured a position as a court reporter, a role that is crucial to legal proceedings. She began making her mark in Savannah, Georgia, where her duties brought her into close contact with attorneys, judges, and court officials. On January 22, 1981, Cam arrived at an office apartment building located at 601 East 49th Street in Savannah. She was there simply to do her job, a task she had trained hard for and executed with care. Unbeknownst to her, danger loomed within the walls of that unassuming building. The following day, on January 23rd, a co-worker arrived at the office apartment to retrieve a key. Upon entering, she was met with a horrific and unexpected scene. 20-year-old Cam Menzies was lying lifeless on the floor. Without hesitation, the co-worker contacted the police authorities to report what she had seen. The police officers responded quickly and arrived at the scene to begin their assessment. They found Cam fully clothed and lying on the floor of the apartment. The room appeared mostly undisturbed. With one exception, a piano bench had been overturned. This small detail was the only immediate indication of a possible struggle. The officers secured the area and began the process of documenting the scene and collecting any evidence that might provide answers. As the investigation unfolded, the police learned a disturbing detail from Cam's recent past. Just 3 months earlier, she had been the victim of a brutal, indecent assault committed by an escaped convict. However, law enforcement confirmed that the man responsible for that attack was in custody at the time, effectively ruling him out as a suspect. Further examination revealed the extent of the violence inflicted upon her. Cam had been stabbed more than 30 times. There were no immediate suspects, and nothing at the scene indicated who might have wanted to harm her in such a vicious manner, and therefore the case eventually went cold. In 1999, nearly 2 decades after the crime happened, the case experienced an unexpected development. Earl Franklin Waggy Sr.'s wife came forward with a startling confession. She told the investigators that she had witnessed her husband commit the crime. However, despite the gravity of the claim, the district attorney at the time declined to pursue prosecution. With no arrest made, the case once again slipped into the background. It was not until 2017, almost another 2 decades later, that the case finally saw a shift. The authorities revisited the evidence and the witness statements, and this renewed investigation ultimately led to Earl Waggy being indicted. At the time of his indictment, Waggy was 70 years old and already serving a 20-year prison sentence in Ohio for an unrelated conviction of child molestation. Waggy's incarceration complicated but did not prevent the pursuit of justice in Cam's case. The authorities coordinated with Ohio officials as they prepared for potential extradition and prosecution. His scheduled release from the Ohio prison system in July 2019 added urgency to the legal process in Georgia, ensuring that he would not walk free before answering to the charges. In 2021, Waggy pleaded guilty. His guilty plea eliminated the need for a prolonged trial and confirmed what investigators had long suspected. He was sentenced to life in prison. In June 2000, 2 motorists traveling in Florida spotted an abandoned suitcase on the roadside. When they opened it, they uncovered the nude body of a woman. As the weeks passed, more bodies surfaced. Years later, a fingerprint match reopened the cold case and set off a transnational investigation. On June 24, 2000, a gruesome discovery was made along Flamingo Road near Cooper City in Florida. 2 motorists spotted a suitcase abandoned by the roadside. Inside, they found the nude body of a woman who was later identified as 35-year-old Kimberly Dietz Livesey. She was a known prostitute with a history of alcohol and illegal substance abuse. She had been arrested just weeks earlier, on June 7th, for prostitution. News of her demise stunned those who knew her, including friends from Alcoholics Anonymous and a local biker group. Despite a public plea for information, the investigators made little progress in Kim's case. Then, on August 9th, another body was found. This time, a duffel bag left near Dania Beach contained the remains of 21-year-old Sia Dames, who had been strangled to her end. Like Kim, she was involved in prostitution. The shocking similarities between the two cases raised suspicions, but there were still no solid leads to connect the dots. A little over a year later, on August 30th, 2001, the pattern continued. The body of 24-year-old Jessica Good was found floating in Biscayne Bay, covered in stab wounds. Her boyfriend told the police that she had gone to meet a light-skinned Hispanic man and never returned. With the demises of 3 women, all prostitutes, all found within a short time frame and geographical area, the authorities began to suspect that a single, dangerous individual might be responsible. Shortly after the body of Jessica Good was found in Biscayne Bay, the investigators identified Roberto Wagner Fernandes as a suspect in her case. The authorities moved quickly to gather evidence, but before they could arrest him, Fernandes fled the United States and returned to Brazil. Because Brazil does not have an extradition treaty with the U.S., bringing him back to face charges proved impossible. Fernandes was born on April 26, 1965, in the Brazilian state of Paraná. In 1989, at the age of 24, he married 20-year-old Danielle Amaral Busas. The couple made their home in the city of Londrina, where Fernandes worked as a private pilot, while Danielle pursued her studies to become a teacher. 2 years later, in 1991, they welcomed their daughter Mariella into the world. In the early morning hours of November 18, 1996, the residents of a Londrina apartment complex were startled by the sound of a heated domestic dispute, which quickly escalated into violence. The confrontation ended with at least 6 gunshots being fired inside the building. When the police were called to the scene, the witnesses reported that the man involved had fled with a small child in his car. The authorities soon apprehended the suspect, identifying him as 31-year-old Roberto Fernandes. His wife, 27-year-old Danielle Fernandes, had been shot with a Taurus TCP 738 and was rushed to the hospital, where she passed away from her injuries. During Fernandes' trial, however, disturbing revelations came to light. According to court proceedings, the argument had begun when Danielle discovered her husband's infidelity, specifically that he had been with a prostitute. Fernandes claimed that his wife had threatened him with a revolver during the confrontation, which led him to panic and fatally shoot her in self-defense. This version of events was met with skepticism, especially after new testimony was introduced. The woman involved, a prostitute, came forward to the police with a troubling account of her encounter with Fernandes. She alleged that during their meeting, he had consumed illegal substances and a large amount of whiskey. According to her, Fernandes became violent, beating her with a water bottle, punching and kicking her, and attempting to drown her in a motel bathtub. She said she managed to escape and run toward the door, at which point he abruptly calmed down and told her to get dressed. The woman also stated that she later contacted Fernandes to verify the authenticity of the check he had given her as payment. Fernandes and his legal team countered these claims by portraying Danielle as intoxicated and unstable during their fight. They also attempted to discredit the prostitute's testimony, asserting that she had become aggressive during the encounter and was seeking to extort more money through the follow-up phone call. Despite the disturbing details and physical evidence suggesting Fernandes's guilt, the case ended in his acquittal. The court ruled that there was not enough evidence to convict him, and Fernandes was released. After Fernandes was acquitted, the tensions in Brazil did not subside. Her family, enraged by the verdict, were rumored to have hired a hitman to exact revenge. Whether or not this threat was real, Fernandes claimed to fear for his life. Determined to leave his past behind, he fled the country and relocated to the United States, eventually settling in Miami, Florida. Between 1996 and 1999, Fernandes attempted to rebuild his life. He took on work as a bus driver for a touring company and later secured a job as a flight attendant at Miami International Airport. But despite the appearance of a fresh start, his behavior remained troubling. During this period, he reportedly continued to engage the services of prostitutes on a regular basis, echoing the pattern of conduct that had once led to tragedy in Brazil. Over the next several years, Fernandes was reportedly linked to other violent crimes involving prostitutes in Brazil, including an indecent assault in 2003. Despite being named a suspect, he was never arrested. On December 13, 2005, Fernandes was flying a Cessna 310 when tragedy struck again, this time in the skies. En route to Argentina, he lost control of the aircraft and crashed in the Misiones department of Paraguay. His life was immediately ended. His body was transported back to Brazil, where he was buried in his hometown. For years, the cases in Miami remained unresolved, and it seemed that Fernandes had escaped justice once more, this time by not being alive. A breakthrough came in 2011 when the investigators matched Fernandes's fingerprints to evidence recovered from all 3 Miami crime scenes. The detectives traveled to Brazil, hoping to confront him. Instead, they were informed that Fernandes had passed away 6 years earlier in the plane crash. The American authorities were skeptical. Given the evasive nature of Fernandes's past behavior, there was suspicion that he might have faked his end. However, at the time, legal restrictions prevented them from exhuming the grave to confirm his identity. The case remained at a standstill until 2018, when a separate case involving a Cuban national led to a new legal precedent. This development created an opportunity for investigators to revisit the Fernandes case. In 2020, with the assistance of the Brazilian Federal Police, the authorities were granted permission to exhume Fernandes's remains. Forensic testing was conducted to determine whether the body buried in his grave truly belonged to him. The long-awaited confirmation came on August 31, 2021. In a press conference, Broward County Sheriff Gregory Toney announced that Fernandes had been officially identified as the perpetrator behind the Miami cases of Kim Dietz-Livesey, Cia de Mes, and Jessica Good. It was also confirmed that Fernandes had indeed perished in the 2005 aviation crash. Following this revelation, the authorities in both the United States and Brazil launched a deeper investigation into Fernandes's past. The investigators have not closed the book on Fernandes. They believe he may be responsible for other unsolved cases in South Florida. Michael Livesey, the former husband of Kimberly Dietz-Livesey, waited 20 years for answers. He said, "My heart goes out to the loved ones of every victim. I hope this gives them a sense of closure as it does to me." The fact that Fernandes was never brought to justice for his crimes still troubles investigators. Detective Zachary Scott said, "I wish we were up here showing you his mugshot. Unfortunately, we were deprived of that pleasure. Knowing his last minutes on Earth were probably filled with terror makes me feel a little better." In January 1982, a medical student just months away from becoming a pediatrician vanished without a trace. But what followed was a trail of lies, suspicious behavior, and decades of unanswered questions. Robert Durst was born on April 12, 1943, in New York City and raised in Scarsdale, New York. He was the eldest child of Seymour Durst, a powerful real estate magnate, and Bernice Herstein. Robert came from a prominent lineage. His paternal grandfather, Joseph Durst, was a Jewish immigrant from Austria-Hungary who arrived in the United States in 1902 and established the Durst Organization in 1927. Robert grew up with 3 younger siblings, Douglas, Tommy, and Wendy. Despite his privileged upbringing, Robert often kept to himself, and former classmates from Scarsdale High School recalled him as a loner. Robert pursued higher education at Lehigh University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in economics in 1965. Later that year, he enrolled in a doctoral program at the University of California, Los Angeles. During his time at UCLA, Robert met Susan Berman, a relationship that would become significant in later years. However, he eventually withdrew from the program and returned to New York in 1969. In the early 1970s, Robert attempted to lead a simpler life by opening a small health food store in Vermont. The business venture was short-lived. In 1973, At the urging of his father, he closed the store and returned to New York to become involved with the family business. Despite being the eldest son, Robert never fully embraced the corporate environment. In 1992, his father broke family tradition and appointed Robert's younger brother, Douglas, to take over the Durst organization. This decision deeply wounded Robert, who believed he was entitled to inherit control of the company. The internal family conflict led to Robert's estrangement and eventual legal action for his share of the inheritance. Robert's personal life took a significant turn in late 1971 when he met Kathleen McCormick, a dental hygienist. Their relationship progressed quickly. After just 2 dates, Robert invited Kathleen to live with him in Vermont. She moved in during January 1972. When Robert returned to New York under family pressure to work at the Durst organization, Kathleen accompanied him. The couple got married on April 12, 1973, in Manhattan. By the early 1980s, Kathleen was a medical student in her final year at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx, aspiring to become a pediatrician. Just months shy of earning her degree, she vanished under mysterious circumstances. On the night of January 31, 1982, Kathleen was last seen by someone other than her husband when she unexpectedly arrived at a dinner party in Newtown, Connecticut. Her friend, who hosted the event, noticed Kathleen appeared distressed and unusually dressed in red sweatpants, clothing she rarely wore in public. Later that evening, Kathleen received a phone call from Robert, prompting her to leave the gathering and return to their cottage in South Salem, New York. After that night, she was never seen again. The day after Kathleen's last confirmed sighting, she was expected to meet her friend, Gilbert Najami, at the Lion's Gate, a Manhattan pub. When Kathleen failed to show up, Gilbert grew alarmed and began calling the police, persistently reaching out over several days. Despite these efforts, it was not until later that week that Robert officially reported his wife missing. A doorman and the superintendent at their Riverside Drive apartment later stated they had seen Kathleen on February 1st, but their accounts were uncertain. The doorman, in particular, noted that he had only glimpsed her from behind and at a distance, casting doubt on his identification. A private investigator hired by Robert's lawyer would later claim that the doorman had not seen her at all and might not have been on duty the night in question. 3 weeks after Robert filed the missing person report, the superintendent found Kathleen's personal items discarded in the building's trash compactor. It also emerged that 3 weeks before vanishing, Kathleen had sought treatment at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx for facial injuries. She had confided in a friend that Robert had assaulted her, but she did not pursue legal action. Around the same time, Kathleen had requested a divorce settlement of $250,000, which Robert refused. Instead, he retaliated by canceling her credit cards, removing her from their joint bank account, and halting tuition payments for her final months of medical school. Robert had been romantically involved with Prudence Farrow for 3 years at the time of Kathleen's disappearance, and was living separately in another apartment. He initially announced a $100,000 reward for information about his wife, but later reduced the amount to $15,000. As concern intensified, one of Kathleen's friends and her sister broke into the South Salem cottage. There, they found the house in disarray. Her belongings were thrown away, her mail had piled up unopened, and the entire residence appeared ransacked. According to Robert, the last time he saw Kathleen was when he dropped her off at the Katana train station, where she planned to take a 9:15 p.m. train back to Manhattan. He also claimed that she later phoned him from their Riverside Drive apartment. Additionally, he stated that on February 4th, a supervisor at her medical school called to inform him that she had not attended class all week and had phoned in sick on February 1st. Whether that call actually came from Kathleen remains unknown. 8 years after her disappearance, Robert filed for divorce, citing spousal abandonment. The case remained cold. Susan Berman, a close confidant of Robert, played a pivotal role in shaping his alibi after the disappearance of his wife. The daughter of David Berman, a powerful figure in Jewish American organized crime, Susan had grown up surrounded by underworld connections. Her father was instrumental in controlling illegal gambling operations in Depression-era Minneapolis, and later became involved in the Flamingo Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. On December 24, 2000, Susan was found deceased in her home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles, California. Her life was ended execution style. Her neighbors had contacted the authorities after noticing her front door ajar and one of her dogs wandering loose. Shortly before Susan's body was discovered, a letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department arrived, postmarked December 23, 2000. It contained her address and the word cadaver, an ominous clue that immediately raised suspicions. Evidence showed that Robert had been in Northern California in the days leading up to the crime and flew to New York the night before Susan's body was found. Around the time of her demise, Susan had received 2 payments totaling $50,000 from Robert. Though Robert admitted to sending Susan $25,000 and later faxed LAPD a copy of her 1982 deposition related to Kathleen's disappearance, he refused to undergo further questioning. Robert claimed that Susan had called him shortly before her demise, saying the LAPD wanted to speak with her about Kathleen. However, an investigation raised doubts about this claim, finding no clear evidence that LAPD or Westchester authorities had scheduled such an interview. Around this time, Robert learned from his sister Wendy that the case into Kathleen's disappearance had been reopened. In response, he fled to Galveston, Texas, assuming the identity of a mute woman named Dorothy Sinner to avoid detection. Susan's biographer Kathy Scott suggested that Robert ended the life of Susan because she possessed damning knowledge about his wife's disappearance. Meanwhile, Robert began living in a low-profile apartment in Galveston. On November 15, 2000, his landlord, Klaus Renee Dillman, received a call from someone claiming to assist a deaf-mute woman seeking to rent the unit. Robert's attempt to vanish quietly unraveled when, on October 9, 2001, body parts belonging to his 71-year-old neighbor, Morris Black, were discovered floating in Galveston Bay. The authorities arrested Robert shortly after the grisly discovery. He was granted bail at $250,000, but failed to appear in court on October 16, prompting a warrant for his arrest on charges of bail jumping. He remained a fugitive until November 30, when he was caught shoplifting minor items like Band-Aids, a newspaper, and a chicken salad sandwich from a Wegmans supermarket in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, despite having $500 in cash on him. A search of his rental car revealed an alarming cachet of $37,000 in cash, 2 handguns, marijuana, Morris Black's driver's license, and printed directions to Kathleen's former home in Connecticut. Even while evading the authorities, Robert continued to exhibit threatening behavior. He used his time on the run to stalk his brother Douglas, reportedly visiting the driveway of Douglas's home in Katana, New York, while armed. This act heightened fears within the Durst family. Once apprehended in Pennsylvania, Robert retained legal counsel and was eventually extradited to Texas to stand trial for ending the life of Morris, launching the next chapter in his increasingly tangled legal saga. Robert testified he shot Morris in self-defense and was acquitted due to a lack of forensic evidence to contest his account. Following the acquittal, Robert pled guilty to evidence tampering by dismembering Morris's body. As part of a plea bargain, he received a sentence of 5 years and was given credit for time served, requiring him to serve 3 years in prison. Robert was then paroled on July 15, 2005. On December 11, 2000, shortly before Susan was found lifeless, Robert married Deborah Lee Cheriton. The two had previously lived together for a short period in 1990 at a Fifth Avenue apartment, but they never maintained a traditional marital relationship. Robert later revealed in the 2005 deposition that their marriage had been purely strategic, describing it as a marriage of convenience. He confided in his sister Wendy that he had married Deborah so she could inherit his fortune, as he was contemplating to end his own life at the time. When Robert was arrested in 2001, it was Deborah who wired the $250,000 needed for his bail. A decade later, on March 14, 2015, Robert was arrested in New Orleans for the case of Susan Berman. The authorities discovered that he was carrying numerous prescription medications, including substances for high blood pressure, muscle relaxation, acid reflux, blood flow, and the sleep aid melatonin. Robert's declining health had been a recurring issue. He had undergone several major medical procedures, including surgery for esophageal cancer, the installation of a brain shunt to treat hydrocephalus, and cervical spinal fusion. Robert was transferred to California and arraigned there in early November 2016. In 2016, Kathleen's family petitioned the court to have her declared legally deceased. Their request was approved the following year. Her mother, Ann McCormick, sued Robert for $100 million, alleging that he took Kathleen's life and denied her family the right to bury her. Both of Kathleen's parents have since passed away, but her sister Mary McCormick Hughes remained steadfast in her belief that Robert was responsible. In 2018, a U.S. Court of Appeals revised Kathleen's legal date of demise to January 31, 1982, the night she disappeared. Although a wrongful demise lawsuit filed by her sister Carol Beaumonte was dismissed in 2019 due to timing, momentum in the case continued to build. During his 2021 trial for Susan's case, his legal team revealed that Robert had been diagnosed with bladder cancer. His deteriorating physical condition was evident during various court appearances and incarcerations. On September 17, 2021, 78-year-old Robert was convicted of Susan's crime and several weeks later was sentenced to life in prison. In October, Robert was also charged for taking the life of Kathleen. On October 16th, he tested positive for COVID-19 and was placed on a ventilator. He was struggling to breathe and speak. It remained unclear how Robert had contracted the virus or whether it had spread to others present during the court proceedings. But Robert's long legal saga came to an end on January 10, 2022, when he lost his life after cardiac arrest at San Joaquin General Hospital in French Camp, California. He had been undergoing medical tests when he suffered the cardiac episode and failed to respond to resuscitation efforts. At the time of his demise, Robert remained in the custody of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Following his demise, Kathleen's family once again pursued legal action, filing a wrongful demise lawsuit against Robert's estate in January 2022. This marked their fourth suit since 2015, as they sought to secure compensation and accountability. In response, a federal judge in the Southern District of New York issued a ruling barring Deborah, Robert's widow and heir, from taking any action with regard to his estimated $100 million estate. The court required Deborah and her attorney to appear in court on March 25, 2022, to show cause why a formal order should not be enacted. In March 2023, a federal court allowed the wrongful demise lawsuit to proceed, dismissing concerns that the claim was untimely due to Robert's passing. The judge ruled that Robert's demise did not invalidate the family's right to seek justice through civil litigation. This decision gave Kathleen's surviving relatives renewed hope for a resolution after decades of unanswered questions and legal obstacles. In July 1976, a peaceful day in Wisconsin's McClintock Park turned into horror when two bodies were found near their campsite. A sealed envelope would bring the breakthrough decades later. David John Schuldes, born on March 2, 1951, and his fiancée, Ellen Matheys, known to many as Ellie, were a beloved couple with a bright future ahead. David was 25 years old in 1976 and attended the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay while also working at the Green Bay Press-Gazette. Ellen, at 24 years old, had recently graduated from the same university and was employed at its library. The two were engaged and preparing for marriage, and their families looked forward to celebrating the next chapter of their lives together. On the morning of July 9, 1976, the couple left their homes in Green Bay for a weekend getaway at McClintock Park Campground, nestled along the Peshtigo River in Silver Cliff, Wisconsin. The campsite was about an hour and a half north of their hometown. They arrived between 11:30 a.m. and noon, set up their tent, and then went for a walk. David carried his camera, capturing moments of their trip. Along the way, they stopped at a restroom facility near the campground. Around 3 p.m., the couple was seen driving through a nearby park. Not long after, a couple camping nearby reported hearing two gunshots. Shortly thereafter, a park employee arrived at the area to check on the firewood supply near the restrooms and stumbled upon a horrific scene. David was lying outside the facility, lifeless, with a gunshot wound to his neck. A second bullet had pierced the bathroom wall. The authorities were alerted after an off-duty police officer, who happened to be driving through the park, was flagged down by the employee and stayed at the scene until help arrived. The investigators quickly found the couple's tent and realized that Ellen was missing. A search was launched, but darkness forced them to suspend efforts for the night. The next morning, the search resumed, and tragically, Ellen's body was found more than 600 feet from where David had fallen. She had been shot and left in a wooded area, the violence extending beyond the initial attack. It was clear the incident involved more than just a random shooting. The autopsy reports confirmed the brutality of the crime. David had been shot in the throat, while Ellen had sustained fatal wounds to the chest and stomach. She had also been intimately assaulted, and evidence of male DNA was found on her body. The weapon used was identified as a .30 caliber rifle. Nothing had been taken from David or Ellen, nor was anything missing from their campsite, leading the investigators to believe that the motive behind the attack was likely an indecent assault rather than robbery. Witnesses in the area, 2 off-duty Wisconsin sheriff's deputies and their wives, reported seeing a man before the shots rang out and the bodies were discovered. The man was described as being between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet tall, weighing around 140 to 160 pounds with dark brown hair that reached his ears and a thin mustache. He appeared to be between 20 and 30 years old and was believed to be driving a dark, older model Dodge or Plymouth vehicle. Based on the witness's account, a sketch of the suspect was created and shared with the public in hopes of generating leads. Despite the efforts made by investigators at the time, no arrests were made, the identity of the man remained unknown, and the case went cold for decades. In 2018, 42 years after the crime, a breakthrough came with the help of modern DNA technology. The Marinette County Sheriff's Office partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company specializing in DNA phenotyping, to generate new suspect images from DNA that had been recovered from Ellen's clothing. 2 composite images were released, one of the suspect as he might have looked at around age 25, and another age-enhanced version to depict him in his mid-60s. The release of the images reignited public interest in the case and gave investigators a new direction to pursue. Later that year, genetic genealogy came into play. A professional genealogist working on the case narrowed down the suspect pool to a specific family with roots in the Green Bay area, the Van Nieuwenhoven family. The investigators began conducting discreet surveillance on one of the Van Nieuwenhoven sons and eventually retrieved a garbage bag from his residence. Inside were socks, a bandage, and an inhaler, all of which were sent to the crime lab for DNA testing. Results confirmed that this individual was not a match. Not deterred, the authorities turned their attention to another brother from the same family. A detective arranged a meeting with the second Van Nieuwenhoven sibling and collected an used coffee cup during their conversation. The cup was tested for DNA, but again, the results did not match the DNA found at the 1976 crime scene. The investigators pressed on, determined to find the individual responsible. The next individual under scrutiny was Raymond Van Nieuwenhoven, a longtime resident of the town of Lakewood. In an effort to collect his DNA discreetly, a deputy approached him under the pretense of conducting a public survey. When Raymond was asked to seal the envelope provided, his saliva on the seal was collected and sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. The results were conclusive. The saliva matched the single-source male DNA profile previously developed from the DNA found on Ellen's shorts. On March 14, 2019, law enforcement arrested 82-year-old Raymond Van Nieuwenhoven for ending the lives of David Schuldes and Ellen Matheys, as well as the assault of Ellen. The investigators were stunned to discover that Van Nieuwenhoven had been living just 20 miles from the crime scene all along. That same day, the police executed a search warrant at his residence and discovered a rifle inside the home. Van Nieuwenhoven, then 84 years old, was tried and found guilty on 2 counts in the first degree. However, the indecent assault charge was dropped by the judge due to the expiration of the statute of limitations. At the time of the crime, Van Nieuwenhoven had been 39 years old. Joanne Mikulski, David's younger sister, said that her family loved Ellie and were excited to welcome her into the family. She said that she recently spoke with their 93-year-old mother about what she was feeling. Joanne recalled her mother saying, "I know it will not be over for me until he is in prison for the rest of his life." She added, "He is 84, and the rest of his life would not be much justice for what he did to David and Ellie, and for the 45 years he has stolen from them, but at this point, it is the only justice left for them." Despite his conviction, the trial brought divided opinions. His youngest daughter, Dorothy, spoke in his defense, expressing disbelief that her father could have committed such acts. During the sentencing hearing, Van Nieuwenhoven was given the opportunity to speak, but repeatedly declared, "Not guilty, not guilty." Much of what he said was difficult to understand, though he appeared to claim that the case against him was rigged. The judge sentenced him to consecutive life terms in prison. In June 2022, while serving his sentence at the long-term care unit at Oshkosh Correctional Institution, Van Nieuwenhoven passed away, though legal proceedings regarding his case did not end there. The defense continued with an appeal, challenging the manner in which police obtained the DNA sample. Van Nieuwenhoven's attorneys argued that the use of a deceptive survey tactic should not have been considered valid consent for generating a DNA profile in an investigation. The prosecutors countered by stating that Van Nieuwenhoven had voluntarily abandoned the envelope to a person he knew was affiliated with law enforcement and, therefore, had no reasonable expectation of privacy. In April 2024, the appeals court sided with the prosecution, ultimately upholding the conviction and ruling that the deception used to obtain DNA evidence was legally permissible. But the attorneys are asking the Wisconsin Supreme Court to review the matter. Cindy Chisek said she was very young at the time but still recalled the impact of her aunt's demise. She said, "I clearly remember the horrific pain in my family's voices and seeing the anguish and sorrow on their faces, seeing tears that would never stop." In June 1977, what began as a peaceful afternoon at Broken Bowl Picnic Grounds in Fall Creek, Oregon, turned into a nightmare. Thanks to advancements in forensic technology, the case would have a breakthrough decades later. Lliana Gay Adank was born on November 21, 1960, in Eugene, Lane County, Oregon. Her love for life was evident in her deep involvement in athletics, sports, and music, interests that brought her joy and kept her constantly active. Among her closest companions were her dear friend Bonnie Vanis and her cousin Kathy Aaron Closter. Lliana attended North Eugene High School. Her romantic life also blossomed during her teenage years. Lliana was in a relationship with Eric Goldstrand. On the afternoon of June 9, 1977, Lliana and Eric set out for a peaceful outing at the Broken Bowl Picnic Grounds at Fall Creek. However, what was intended to be a serene and joyful excursion quickly unraveled into a nightmare. The couple could not have foreseen that their visit to Fall Creek would take a dark and irreversible turn. Eric had informed his parents earlier that day about the couple's plans to spend time at the Broken Bowl Picnic Grounds. They were expected to return home by 10 p.m. When Eric and Lliana failed to make it back by the agreed time, concern began to grow. Although the initial worry was mild, there was some reassurance in knowing Eric had contacted his stepfather earlier in the evening. During the call, Eric explained that he was experiencing truck trouble and asked Ted to come looking for them if they had not returned by the 10 p.m. curfew. Acting on Eric's request, his parents drove up the highway toward Fall Creek in hopes of finding them safe. Their search led them to Eric's Ford pickup truck, which they found parked and unattended. Inside the vehicle, they discovered his wallet placed beneath the driver's seat, an unusual and troubling detail. Alarmed, Eric's parents quickly notified law enforcement. A sheriff's deputy was dispatched to the area, and the search resumed with a sense of urgency. The deputy and the concerned parents decided to split up in order to cover more ground. Their worst fears were soon realized when the deputy discovered the unclothed body of 16-year-old Lliana about 100 feet from the truck. She had been indecently assaulted and shot 3 times, in the head and chest with a small caliber firearm. Faced with a horrific crime scene, the deputy immediately called for backup and instructed Eric's parents to leave the area to avoid disturbing evidence. At that point, the authorities did not reveal the full extent of the tragedy they had uncovered. The search continued, and Eric was eventually found nearby, also fatally shot. He had been struck twice in the chest with the same type of small caliber weapon used on Lliana. The investigators processed the crime scene carefully, collecting fingerprints and biological evidence in hopes of identifying the perpetrator. Though they worked with the forensic technology available in the late 1970s, their analysis yielded no clear suspects. Despite efforts by the Lane County Sheriff's Office and ongoing community interest, the investigation quickly stalled and the case went cold. In July 2020, more than 4 decades later, as forensic technology advanced, the capabilities of DNA analysis grew significantly, enabling investigators to determine physical characteristics such as hair and eye color, racial background, and certain facial features from a genetic sample. This level of detail allowed law enforcement to create a composite image of the potential suspect based on forensic data alone. Armed with this enhanced evidence, the Cold Case Unit detectives narrowed their focus to a specific family residing in Oak Ridge, Oregon. As the investigation progressed, DNA was discreetly collected from a discarded cigarette butt belonging to one family member, which ultimately ruled him out as a suspect. This critical exclusion left 2 brothers, who had since relocated to Mesa, Arizona, as the primary focus of the investigation. Just as investigators were closing in on the brothers, an unexpected incident further propelled the case forward. In February 2021, the 2 siblings became involved in a domestic altercation, prompting a police response. During the incident, the younger brother sustained injuries, and law enforcement was called to intervene. Before the authorities could question the older brother, Ronald Albert Schroy, he took his own life. The timing and nature of his demise raised serious suspicions and appeared to be linked to the renewed investigation and the pressure closing in on him. Following Ronald's demise, investigators turned their attention to the surviving brother, closely examining his past behavior and any criminal history, including records of violent or assaultive conduct. Eventually, in September 2021, conclusive DNA results confirmed that the older brother Ronald Schroy was responsible for ending the lives of Lliana and Eric. Though the justice system would not see a trial due to Schroy ending his own life, the confirmation offered some measure of peace. Eric's mother expressed this sentiment poignantly, acknowledging the emotional burden of what a trial might have entailed. She said, "It feels good that I do not have to go to a trial. I would have been terrified that he would have gotten off." In January 1987, in Sydney, Australia, the lifeless body of a devoted father was discovered in Randwick's Allison Park. After a $1 million reward, an arrest was made decades later. Raymond Keam was born in 1944. At 44 years old, he lived in Sydney and was an expert in martial arts. At one point in his life, Raymond had been married. Although the marriage eventually ended in divorce, he later found love again in a romantic relationship with Diane Smart. He was the proud father of 4 children. His love for them was evident in everything he did. On the morning of January 13, 1987, garbage truck workers were making their usual rounds when they came across a disturbing sight in Randwick Park. As they passed through the area, they discovered the lifeless body of Raymond. The unexpected discovery shocked the workers, who wasted no time in contacting the authorities. The police arrived promptly at the scene after receiving the report. Upon their arrival, they found Raymond's body lying still, the color drained from his skin. He was cold and blue, a grim confirmation that he had been lifeless for some time. Several bystanders had gathered nearby, drawn by the commotion and sirens. Among them were a few witnesses who stood silently, processing the unsettling scene. One Catholic sister, moved by compassion, paused to say a prayer for Raymond's soul, offering a quiet moment of reverence amid the unfolding tragedy. As investigators examined the scene, they noticed something both personal and poignant. resting gently on Raymond's cheek, was a karate medallion. It was not just a symbol of his martial arts background, but a sentimental gift from his wife. The placement of the medallion suggested a deeper, possibly emotional connection to whoever had been present at the time of his demise. At the time of the investigation, the authorities considered the possibility that Raymond's demise was the result of a gay hate crime. It was suspected that he may have been targeted by a violent group known for attacking gay men in the area during that period. This group had been linked to a number of assaults around the same time. Although Raymond identified as heterosexual, the location of where his body was discovered added complexity to the case. Randwick's Allison Park, where his body was found, was widely known at the time as a popular gay beat during the late 1980s. A post-mortem examination later confirmed that Raymond had lost his life from severe head injuries. The brutality of the wounds suggested a violent confrontation. Despite the intensity of the investigation and the tragic nature of his demise, no one was ever charged in connection with the case, and the case went cold. In 2019, more than 3 decades after Raymond Keam's tragic demise, the police made the decision to revisit the case. A renewed investigation was launched, aiming to uncover what had been missed or overlooked in the original inquiry. The authorities were determined to bring justice to a case that had long gone cold, and to offer some resolution to Raymond's grieving family. The detective superintendent at the time confirmed the renewed effort, stating, "A reinvestigation into the case of Raymond Keam has commenced, with officers re-examining all available physical and forensic evidence and re-interviewing key witnesses." In 2021, the police made another significant move. They publicly announced a $1 million reward for information related to the crime. Raymond's partner, Diane Smart, spoke out following the renewed attention to the case. She revealed that she had been expecting to meet Raymond in Canberra later that week back in 1987. The shock of his demise came not from a phone call or official notice, but from a news broadcast. The grief and suddenness of that moment had stayed with her ever since. Diane expressed hope that the $1 million reward might finally encourage someone to come forward. For her and for Raymond's children and loved ones, justice had been delayed for far too long. In August 2021, a major breakthrough in the decades-old case came when 77-year-old Stanley Bruce Early was arrested in Melbourne. The authorities extradited him to New South Wales, where he was officially charged. At the time when Raymond's case was opened, Early had been known as Stanley Sutton and went by the nickname Spider. He lived directly across the road from Allison Park, the location where Raymond's body was found in 1987. Early had been part of the group known to target men they believed to be gay, launching violent assaults on them in and around the park. On June 8, 2023, the case finally reached a courtroom conclusion. A Sydney court found 77-year-old Stanley Bruce Early guilty of ending the life of Raymond. The court heard that Early told a psychiatrist he was bisexual at one stage in his life and had been indecently assaulted in jail. It also heard that he smashed the window of a Porsche near the park because he thought the owner was gay, and he had approached a group of school students and asked if they wanted to help him clean up the park. After considering the evidence, the jury determined that Early had brutally attacked Raymond in Allison Park at night, driven by the mistaken belief that Raymond was homosexual. The verdict confirmed long-held suspicions about the motive behind the crime. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial and lacked direct witnesses to the assault. Despite this, the jury was convinced of Early's guilt. The absence of eyewitnesses did not overshadow the weight of the evidence gathered through years of investigation and the clear link between Early's actions and the violent attack. Several months later, on November 7, 2023, the final chapter of the legal process unfolded. New South Wales Supreme Court Justice Dina Yehia sentenced Early to a maximum of 22 years in prison. Justice Yehia said, "The offender continues to deny his involvement in the slaying. He has shown no remorse whatsoever." She also said, "I accept the offender has some mental health issues that appear to be treated appropriately with medication. He will be detained in the Hospital of Long Bay Prison for his mental health issue to continue to be addressed. Early was ordered to serve a mandatory 15 years and 6 months before being eligible for parole. Based on the terms of the sentence, he would not be eligible for release until the year 2037, at which point he would be 91 years old. In July 1988, a maintenance worker entered the basement of the Fargo building in South Boston, Massachusetts, and uncovered a horrifying scene. Decades later, the perpetrator would be found, already in custody. On July 20, 1988, 21-year-old Judy Ellen Chamberlain was found strangled in the basement of the Fargo building located at 451 D Street in South Boston. A maintenance worker discovered her body submerged in a large sump pump. A forensic examination revealed that she had also been indecently assaulted by the individual who ended her life. Her untimely demise left her family devastated, and for decades there were no answers. It was not until more than 2 decades later, in 2011, that a breakthrough came through DNA technology. A match in a DNA database connected Richard Vega to the crime. The sample that led to this match had been collected from Judy's body back in 1988. Despite this apparent lead, the prosecutors in Suffolk County concluded that they did not have enough evidence to prove Vega's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As a result, the case remains unresolved in the eyes of the law, though the connection to Vega is clear. Vega had been previously convicted in 1990 on 3 counts of indecent assault involving a 1987 assault on an elderly woman in Revere. That conviction resulted in a 20-year prison sentence. As part of the legal process for his earlier conviction, Vega was required to submit a DNA sample, which ultimately became the key link in Judy's case decades later. As Vega's release from prison approached, the Suffolk prosecutors filed a petition to have him civilly committed. In 2008, a jury determined that Vega was dangerous, and he has remained in custody ever since. After another decade, in 2021, Suffolk District Attorney Rachel Rollins made the decision to reopen the cold case of Judy Chamberlain. Through renewed investigative efforts, additional evidence was gathered, which allowed the case to move forward. These developments culminated in August 2021, when a grand jury returned an indictment against Richard Vega. Vega, already known as a convicted offender, was officially indicted for both the indecent assault and ending the life of Judy. This marked a turning point in a case that had remained stagnant for 33 years. Despite the earlier hesitation in 2011 due to lack of sufficient evidence, the reopening of the investigation provided the prosecution with what they believed was finally enough to bring the case to trial. His continued confinement made it possible to bring him to court to face charges in Judy's case without delay. The long pursuit of justice reached its conclusion in July 2024. After a full trial, Vega was found guilty. Following the conviction, Vega was sentenced to life in prison. In the aftermath of the sentencing, the family expressed their deep gratitude for the justice system's efforts and for the closure they had fought so long to obtain. Judy's brother, John Olson, said, "She was beautiful, loved, and still is. Judy remains in our mind and hearts until we meet again." In December 1983, in a flat in Windmill Court, Shoot Hill, London, the lifeless body of a 50-year-old man was found. The perpetrator would wait nearly 4 decades before walking into a police station to confess. Christopher Ainscough was born in Dublin sometime around 1933. A proud Irishman and openly gay, he eventually moved to London, where he built a quiet and respectable life for himself, working as a waiter. In December 1983, he failed to show up for his job in the city. Concerned by his unexplained absence, his colleagues contacted the authorities. The police officers were dispatched to his flat at Windmill Court on Shoot Hill to conduct a welfare check. When the officers entered the apartment, they were met with a horrifying scene. Christopher was found deceased inside his home. He had suffered devastating injuries to the head, and it was immediately clear that his demise had not been accidental. The investigators found a marble ashtray at the scene, weighing approximately 2.4 kilograms. It had been used to strike Christopher with such force that it caused a fractured skull, leaving no doubt that he had been deliberately and violently attacked. The detectives struggled to identify a suspect. No one had seen or heard anything suspicious, and no immediate leads surfaced. With limited forensic tools at the time and a lack of witnesses or concrete evidence, the original investigation reached a standstill. After nearly 2 years of effort with no breakthrough, the case was officially closed in 1985. For more than 35 years, the case remained unsolved until 2020, when it took a sudden and unexpected turn. After years of silence, 58-year-old Anthony Kemp, a homeless man, walked into Chiswick Police Station in West London and confessed to ending the life of Christopher Ainscough. It was the early hours of the morning, just after 4 a.m., when Kemp began throwing stones at the station's window to get the attention of officers. When one of them came outside, Kemp made a startling admission. He told the officer that he had taken a life 40 years earlier. Kemp stated that he had bashed his brains in following an argument and expressed no remorse for what he had done. He openly declared, "I am not going to live on the streets. That is a fact. I would rather the government look after me. I would rather do the last few years of my life in bang up than sleep on the streets." He ended by saying, "For 40 years I got away with it and now I am owning up to it." His confession stunned the officers. During questioning, Kemp admitted to attacking Christopher with a marble ashtray, the same object found at the scene in 1983. He revealed that after delivering the fatal blows, he wiped down the crime scene to remove any trace of evidence. At the time of the crime, Kemp had been just 21 years old. Despite the years that had passed, his confession provided critical new details that aligned with the original findings from the scene. The police were able to support Kemp's confession with physical evidence. A cigarette butt recovered from Christopher's flat during the original investigation was retested, and the DNA analysis confirmed Kemp's presence at the scene. With both a confession and forensic proof, Kemp was charged. He appeared in court and pleaded guilty to the charge. In October 2021, the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15.5 years. Following Kemp's arrest and conviction, Detective Chief Inspector Simon Harding from the Specialist Crime Command renewed efforts to identify Christopher's next of kin. Despite their attempts during the initial investigation in the 1980s, the police had never been able to locate any of his family members. With the case finally resolved after decades, the authorities hoped to inform any surviving relatives and bring some measure of closure to those who had once known the man whose life was so violently cut short. In April 1991, in Nags Head, North Carolina, human remains were found inside a trash can rack. What followed was a painful unraveling of secrets, a long-awaited arrest, and a courtroom reckoning that would bring a small measure of justice to a life lost too soon. On April 4, 1991, a disturbing discovery in the coastal town of Nags Head, North Carolina, prompted an urgent police response. The officers were dispatched to the 8,600 block of East Tides Drive after someone reported what appeared to be human remains found in a trash can rack. Upon arrival, the authorities discovered the decomposed body of an infant. Due to the severe state of decomposition, the investigators were initially unable to determine the gender of the child. In the days that followed, an autopsy was performed at the North Carolina Medical Examiner's Office in Greenville. Forensic pathologist Dr. Mary Gilliland led the examination and made several harrowing discoveries. According to Dr. Gilliland, the infant's cause of demise was asphyxia caused by airway obstruction, specifically from a plastic hair curler. In addition to the asphyxiation, the child also suffered blunt force trauma to the face. The lower portion of the infant's torso was missing. While this damage was likely the result of animal activity after the body had been discarded, the condition of the remains made it difficult to assess other injuries. Despite the decomposition, it was determined that the infant appeared to be full-term and showed signs of being alive when the curler was inserted. At the time, the authorities had no way of identifying the infant and no leads pointing to the child's parents or anyone who might have been involved. With no witnesses, no DNA identification technology readily available, and no one coming forward, the case went cold. The almost 3 decades-long mystery of the unidentified infant took a turn in 2019 when the investigators decided to reopen the case, hoping that new advances in forensic technology could provide the answers they had long sought. The detectives sent one of the child's rib bones to Akram. The lab was eventually able to extract DNA from the sample and trace it through genealogical records to identify possible relatives of the infant. This breakthrough led investigators to 54-year-old Scott Gordon Poole and 51-year-old Robin Lynn Byrum, who had been in an on-and-off relationship around the time of the child's birth. With assistance from the Alexander County Sheriff's Office and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, the Nags Head Police Department conducted a multi-agency operation to collect DNA samples from Poole and Byrum. Testing confirmed that the pair were the biological parents of the deceased infant. In October 2021, both were arrested and charged in Dare County with 1 count each of concealing the birth of a child, a felony offense. Byrum and Poole were released shortly afterward on $250,000 secured bonds as the legal process began to unfold. During interviews with the investigators, Byrum initially denied ever being pregnant, claiming she suffered from endometriosis and Graves' disease. However, when confronted with the DNA evidence, she reportedly broke down in tears and admitted that she had not known she was pregnant until she went into labor in the bathroom. Byrum claimed that the baby was stillborn and that she used the hair curler in a desperate attempt to get it to breathe. According to her account, she gave birth alone in her car, attempted to revive the baby, and then kept the infant with her inside the house for several days. When the body began to smell, she said she took it to the beach. In another account, Byrum told the investigators that after leaving the beach, she went to the ocean intending to take her own life, but ultimately did not follow through. Instead, she drove around for a while before placing the infant's body in the trash, where it was eventually discovered. At the time of the incident, Byrum was living with her parents on Tarkle Ridge Drive in Kitty Hawk. She claimed that she never informed anyone, including her parents or Poole, about the pregnancy or the birth. Poole, for his part, told the investigators that he had no knowledge of the pregnancy or the child's existence, a statement that Byrum supported. The legal proceedings concluded in 2023 with significant developments. Poole was rearrested on February 17, 2023, after failing to appear in court and was held on a $1 million secured bond. In a plea deal, in June 2023, Byrum faced a maximum sentence of 20 years, with a presumptive term of 6 years. Senior Resident Superior Court Judge Jerry Tillett sentenced her to serve up to 6 years, taking into account credit for time already served and good behavior. On the same day, Poole appeared in court and pleaded guilty to the failure to appear charge. As part of his agreement with the district attorney, the charge connected to the child's birth was dismissed. He was sentenced to 24 months of unsupervised probation and ordered to pay court and attorney fees. In December 1977, a group of hunters stumbled upon skeletal remains in Mississippi. The woman remained unidentified for over 4 decades. On December 27, 1977, a group of hunters made a grim discovery at a construction site near Interstate 10 and Highway 63, now Highway 613, in Mississippi. They stumbled upon skeletal remains belonging to a woman. Although no exact cause of demise could be determined, the medical examiners believed that her life was ended. It was estimated that she had been deceased for approximately 3 to 4 months before her body was found. The unidentified woman was described as a small in stature African American, notable for a front gold tooth that stood out in her smile. The investigators also believed she may have been wearing a wig. These physical details were among the few clues available to authorities. With no identity and no immediate leads, she became known as Escatawpa Jane Doe, a name that would remain attached to her case for more than 4 decades. Efforts to identify her continued over the years, with several facial reconstructions and computer-generated composites created to aid recognition. In 2012, Pascagoula police investigator Darren Versiga entered her case into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System in hopes of reaching a broader audience. Despite these efforts, early attempts at identification through DNA analysis yielded no successful matches. A breakthrough came in 2018 when convicted serial offender Samuel Little confessed to a series of crimes across the southeastern United States. Among them was the case of a woman he did not know by name, but whose description matched Escatapa Jane Doe. The investigators confirmed that Little had been in Jackson County in 1977, during the time frame in which she is believed to have lost her life. Although the cause of her demise remained uncertain, the authorities noted that Little often used strangulation in his crimes. Little eventually confessed to 93 cases, making him the most prolific serial offender in United States history, if all are verified. FBI analysts have supported the credibility of his confessions, including the one believed to involve Escatapa Jane Doe. In December 2020, Samuel Little passed away in prison, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and unclaimed victims, including the woman found in Mississippi whose identity was still officially unknown. In January 2021, progress was made into identifying Escatapa Jane Doe. The Mississippi State Crime Lab collaborated with Akram to conduct forensic genealogy using the victim's DNA. Dr. David Middleman of Akram soon contacted investigator Matt Hoggett with a promising lead, a possible distant relative of the victim residing in Texas. The connection had been identified through advanced DNA analysis. Investigator Hoggett reached out to the distant cousin, who then directed him to her 93-year-old paternal grandmother, originally from Lafleur County, Mississippi. When interviewed, the elderly woman revealed that her cousin Clara Birdlong, born around 1933, had vanished from Lafleur County sometime in the 1970s. Another distant cousin recalled that Clara was known by the nickname Nuttin, and described her as a petite woman who wore a wig and had a gold front tooth. She too confirmed that Clara disappeared without a trace in the 1970s. In August 2021, the investigation gained momentum when Hoggett located a woman in Lafleur County who had known Clara. She recalled that Clara left the area in the 1970s with an African-American man who claimed to be traveling through Mississippi on his way to Florida. After leaving with him, Clara was never seen or heard from again. This information aligned with the estimated time of demise of Escatapa Jane Doe and provided a critical link between the unidentified woman and Clara. The following month in September, Hoggett requested DNA samples from several individuals closely connected to Clara. The samples were sent to Akram for comparison. Their analysis confirmed a match between the victim and the 93-year-old grandmother. After eliminating all other possible relatives, the investigators formally concluded that the woman known for over 40 years as Escatapa Jane Doe was Clara Birdlong, born in 1933 in Lafleur County, Mississippi. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Little had been arrested in Pascagoula in August 1977 for petty theft, placing him in the area during the approximate time of Clara's disappearance. Although he is deceased, Little is considered the prime suspect in Clara's demise. While the exact cause of her demise remains undetermined, the identification of Clara brought long-awaited answers to a mystery that had spanned more than 4 decades. In October 2014, concern turned to alarm when a paraplegic man living in East Liverpool, Ohio, vanished without a trace. Volunteer dive teams would bring a breakthrough to this cold case. Charles Fluharty, also known by many as Chuck, was born on May 23, 1957, in East Liverpool, Ohio. He was the son of Charles and Billy Fluharty, and he spent his life rooted in the town where he was born. At the age of 57, Charles was living with significant physical limitations, being a paraplegic and paralyzed from the waist down. In addition to his paralysis, his right leg had been amputated below the knee, and he bore a small, handmade tattoo on his left arm. Personal markings that hinted at the life he had lived. He found solace near the Ohio River. This riverside location became a personal sanctuary for him, a quiet place where he would go to reflect on life. He was the brother of 3 sisters, Marge Sackmar, Donna Stemple, and Trudy Cowie, as well as a brother, Jeff Fluharty. His daily life was supported by professional care. Charles received regular assistance from a home health aide. This setup allowed him to continue living outside of institutional care. On October 19, 2014, concern for Charles's safety escalated when his sister, Donna Stemple, reported him missing. The alarm had been raised after Charles made disturbing comments to his home health aide, which suggested he may have been in emotional distress or possibly in danger. Following the report, police visited his residence at Riverview Towers, a housing complex where Charles lived. Upon arrival, they discovered not only that Charles was gone, but his black Chevrolet Beretta was also missing. The vehicle's license plate number, 755XEL, was documented in the initial missing person report. The disappearance of a wheelchair-bound man, especially one dependent on others for mobility, raised immediate red flags. The authorities launched a search effort, but despite time and resources, there were no significant leads. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. The case gradually grew cold. Then, in early October 2021, 7 years later, a startling discovery was made. On October 6th, a search effort in the Ohio River yielded a critical breakthrough. Divers were sent to examine a submerged object located at the mouth of Yellow Creek. The team battled through a thick layer of invasive zebra mussels that had encrusted the vehicle over time, but they successfully managed to retrieve the license plate from the sunken car. Sonar technology had detected the vehicle fairly quickly, prompting divers to inspect what appeared to be a long submerged automobile. It did not take long to confirm that the car matched the description of the black Chevrolet Beretta that had belonged to Charles Fluharty. The license plate number 755XEL served as the definitive link, tying the vehicle in the river to the man who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years earlier. The vehicle's location, submerged at the mouth of Yellow Creek in the Ohio River, suggested it had been there since shortly after Charles went missing. The Chaos Divers, a group known for their underwater recovery missions, joined their Adventures with Purpose AWP colleagues on a live stream to share details of the recovery with their online audience. They described the operation in detail, noting the physical and environmental challenges they encountered during the process. One of the main difficulties was the thick silt in the riverbed, which significantly delayed the removal of the vehicle. According to the divers, it took approximately 5 to 6 hours for first-class towing to fully extract the Chevrolet Beretta from the water. Once the vehicle was successfully pulled from the river, Saline Township EMS stepped in to handle the next phase of the recovery. They removed human remains found in the vehicle and transported them to the Jefferson County morgue for examination and identification. The authorities expressed confidence that the remains belonged to Charles, and then it was finally confirmed. For the Fluharty family, the discovery is both an emotional blow and a necessary development. It brings an end to the agonizing uncertainty that had stretched on for years and could solve and close the missing persons case. No foul play is suspected. In December 2007, a 6-year-old girl disappeared from her home in Clermont, Florida. Years later, a message received online would lead to a breakthrough. Jacqueline Hernandez was born in 2001 and raised in the city of Clermont. She was the daughter of Angelica Vences Salgado and Pablo Hernandez. Her childhood was shaped by the separation of her parents. After their split, legal custody of Jacqueline was granted to her mother, Angelica. Despite the separation, Jacqueline maintained contact with her father. Pablo continued to be a part of her life through visits, and there was no indication of any serious conflict between the parents at that time. Their arrangement appeared to function with some degree of normalcy, allowing Jacqueline to have a relationship with both her mother and father. On December 22, 2007, a devastating event unfolded when 6-year-old Jacqueline was reported kidnapped from her home. That day marked the beginning of a long and painful ordeal for her family. Her mother returned home to find her daughter missing without a trace. Alarmed and overwhelmed with fear, she immediately contacted the local law enforcement to report Jacqueline as missing. The authorities launched an investigation right away, working to piece together Jacqueline's last known movements and identify who had been in contact with her before her disappearance. The focus quickly turned to Jacqueline's father, Pablo. Though he had been allowed visits, he did not have legal custody of Jacqueline. The investigators determined that he had been the last person to see her before she vanished. It was soon alleged that Pablo had taken Jacqueline from the home either during a visit or through deceit, removing her without Angelica's knowledge or consent. His actions were considered a violation of the custody arrangement and a serious criminal offense. The authorities concluded that Pablo had likely fled the country with Jacqueline, heading to Mexico shortly after the abduction took place. On the same day of the kidnapping, a felony warrant for Pablo was issued, charging him with kidnapping. Despite the urgency of the situation, efforts to locate him and Jacqueline faced significant challenges. The fact that he had possibly crossed international borders complicated the investigation, limiting the immediate reach of U.S. law enforcement. As weeks turned into months and eventually years, no confirmed sightings or reliable leads emerged. Although the case remained officially open, it gradually became classified as cold, with few updates and no resolution in sight. 14 years after Jacqueline was reported as missing, on September 2, 2021, a breakthrough came. Jacqueline's mother reached out to the Claremont Police Department with an unexpected claim. She had been contacted online by a woman who was convinced she was Jacqueline. This revelation sparked a renewed sense of urgency as the authorities scrambled to confirm whether the woman was indeed Jacqueline. In response to this potentially life-altering lead, a coordinated effort was set into motion involving multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Florida and Texas police departments, as well as investigators from the Department of Homeland Security. A plan was developed to intercept the woman and verify her identity during a meeting with Angelica. The two agreed to meet in person at a point of entry to the United States in Laredo, Texas on September 10th to discuss the matter further and confirm the woman's identity. On the day of the planned meeting, the authorities were ready. Homeland Security investigations, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Laredo Police Department were all on standby to ensure the safety of both parties while verifying the woman's claims. At around 2 p.m. that afternoon, law enforcement intercepted both Angelica and the woman who had reached out to her, right at the U.S.-Mexico border. Through careful checks and documentation, the authorities were able to confirm that the woman was indeed Jacqueline Hernandez. After over a decade of uncertainty, Angelica finally learned the truth about her daughter's fate. The years of searching, the unanswered questions, and the emotional toll of not knowing whether Jacqueline was alive or deceased came to an end. The emotional moment was a bittersweet one. While it was a relief to confirm Jacqueline's identity, it raised a new set of questions. Jacqueline had been living in Mexico for years, under circumstances that had yet to be fully understood. What Jacqueline experienced during her years in Mexico remains largely unknown. The details of her upbringing, living conditions, and the identity of the people around her during those years have not yet been made public. Meanwhile, Pablo, the man believed to have taken Jacqueline from her home in 2007, remains at large. The authorities have confirmed that there is still an active warrant for his arrest, and efforts to locate him continue. His current whereabouts are unknown, and he has not made any public statements or contact since the day of the abduction, but the missing persons case was finally solved. In January 1984, a 57-year-old man from Grand Isle, Louisiana, vanished without a trace. In 1986, human remains were discovered in a rural water well in Manny, Louisiana. Both cases remained cold for decades. In April 1986, the Sabine Parish Sheriff's Office opened a crime investigation following the discovery of human remains. The skeletal remains were recovered from a water well on farmland just outside the town of Manny, Louisiana. Although the remains were collected and logged, his identity remained unknown for decades. He was known as the man in the well. It was not until 2021, 35 years later, that advancements in forensic science allowed authorities to positively identify them as belonging to Lester J. Rome. Lester, born on April 20th, 1926, was a man from Grand Isle, Louisiana. By the age of 57, he had established himself as the owner of a lounge on the island called Rome's Lounge. On January 9th, 1984, Lester was last seen, and when days passed without any word from him, his family grew concerned. They reported him missing to the Grand Isle Police Department later that same month. The case was soon handed over to the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office for further investigation. As the detectives from the Sheriff's Office began their inquiry, attention quickly turned to Patricia Tito, a teenager who had been living in Lester's home at the time of his disappearance. Patricia was not only residing with him, but was also known to be his live-in girlfriend. In the aftermath of his disappearance, she assumed control of many aspects of his life. She continued operating the lounge in his absence, stayed in his house, and used his car. Her occupation of Lester's property and business raised suspicion, especially when his brother arrived on the island and promptly evicted her from the premises. Patricia's behavior and the stories she shared further deepened investigators' concerns. According to multiple reports, she told residents that she had driven Lester to the airport for a trip and that she was the last person to see him. However, she gave a different version of events to another woman, claiming that Lester had transferred ownership of the lounge to her and left the state voluntarily. These conflicting narratives raised significant red flags for the authorities and made her a key figure in the case. Despite being considered a suspect by the sheriff's office, Patricia was never formally charged. The investigation stalled due to the absence of crucial evidence, most notably Lester's body. Without physical proof of foul play or a crime scene, the detectives were unable to move forward. Every lead pointed back to Patricia, yet the lack of tangible evidence left the authorities at a standstill, and the case went cold. In 2021, the renewed investigation quickly shifted its focus back to Patricia Tito. She was already behind bars, serving a 40-year prison sentence. She had pleaded guilty to manslaughter in 2007 after admitting to the fatal shooting of a Shreveport woman on August 31, 2003. The woman is Judy Wynn. Tito said she stood outside Judy's home and shot her as she was washing dishes. With Lester's remains finally identified, the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office joined the Sabine Parish authorities in re-examining the details of his case. During interviews with a Sabine Parish detective, Tito admitted that she had knowledge that Lester's life was ended, though she initially claimed she had only witnessed the event. According to her account, another man, Devin Avard Sibley, was responsible for ending Lester's life, allegedly over a substance-related debt. An arrest warrant was issued for him. The well in which Lester's remains were found was on a property formerly owned by Sibley's family. She further stated that the fatal incident occurred in Jefferson Parish, which aligned with her presence in Grand Isle at the time of his disappearance. Her statement prompted Jefferson Parish investigators to pursue the case with renewed determination. In 2022, Tito was transferred back to Jefferson Parish for further questioning. As the investigation progressed, she changed her story again, offering a new narrative. This time, she alleged that she and Lester had been entering into a business arrangement, but their partnership soured when he made unwanted advances toward her. Tito claimed that the business deal collapsed, and, shortly after, Lester lost his life. The investigators, armed with new testimony and the long-awaited confirmation of Lester's identity, presented the case to a grand jury. In December 2023, a Jefferson Parish grand jury indicted Patricia Tito to the second degree. On November 13, 2024, Tito was formally sentenced to life in prison for her role. In December 1978, investigators uncovered a chilling secret beneath the floorboards of John Wayne Gacy's home in Norwood Park, Illinois. Hidden in a cramped crawl space lay the remains of a man whose identity remained a mystery for decades. On December 26, 1978, investigators made a grim discovery when they located a body concealed within the crawl space of John Wayne Gacy's home in Norwood Park. Gacy, a notorious serial offender, had used this hidden area to bury many of his victims. He passed away on May 10, 1994 in Stateville Correctional Center. Despite thorough forensic examinations, the precise cause of the man's demise was never determined, leaving many questions about his final moments unanswered. Unable to identify the body at the time, he remained a John Doe and was eventually laid to rest on June 12, 1981, at Oak Ridge Glen Oak Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. Among the victims recovered from Gacy's residence, several remained unidentified for decades, including those referred to as Body 10, Body 13, Body 21, Body 26, and Body 28. In 2021, more than 4 decades later, in a collaborative effort to solve these lingering mysteries, the Cook County Sheriff's Office partnered with the DNA Doe Project. The project focused on Body 5, extracting a DNA profile and comparing it to public databases to find potential family matches. This led investigators to the man's surviving relatives, including his mother and half-brother, who provided their own DNA samples for comparison. After extensive testing, on October 25, 2021, the DNA results conclusively confirmed that the remains belonged to Francis Wayne Alexander, finally putting a name to the decades-old mystery. Francis was born on March 11, 1955 in Manchester, North Carolina. Later in life, he relocated to New York, where he briefly married. However, the marriage ended in divorce after just 3 months in 1975. Shortly afterward, in February of that same year, Francis moved to Chicago. There, he worked in a variety of bars and clubs, supporting himself while maintaining regular contact with his family despite the distance. His half-sister fondly recalled receiving a postcard from him shortly before Christmas in 1975. In the message, Francis expressed his love and promised to visit soon. Trusting his words, she expected him to keep that promise, but Francis never arrived. Over time, as communication became increasingly infrequent, his family grew worried about his well-being. Concerned for his safety, his family reached out to the police in California, believing Francis might be working there. Unfortunately, due to a misunderstanding between the family and law enforcement, no missing person report was ever officially filed. Records from the police show that he was still in Chicago on January 5, 1976, when he received a traffic ticket. This is the last known official record confirming his whereabouts. Francis's demise was estimated to have occurred between January 1976 and March 1977, but the cause remained unknown. Despite this breakthrough, the circumstances that brought Francis into contact with Gacy remain unclear. There is no evidence indicating that Francis worked in construction or had any professional ties to Gacy, who was himself a contractor. The identification of Francis's remains brought some measure of closure to his family after decades of uncertainty. His family said in a statement, "It is hard, even 45 years later, to know the fate of our beloved Wayne. His life was taken at the hands of a violent and evil man. Our hearts are heavy. Our sympathies go out to other victims' families. Our only comfort is knowing this perpetrator no longer breathes the same air as we do. We can now lay to rest what happened and move forward by honoring Wayne." In April 1984, skeletal remains were discovered in Palmer, Alaska. The victim, a young woman, had been shot and stabbed. Her identity remained a mystery for decades. On April 25, 1984, skeletal remains were discovered near Horseshoe Lake. The remains were determined to be those of a woman who had suffered both a gunshot wound and a stab wound, suggesting a violent end. Due to the lack of identifying information, the woman was labeled Horseshoe Harriet based on the location where her body had been found. For decades, Horseshoe Harriet remained a mystery, her name and life story buried with her remains. Almost 2 decades later, her remains were exhumed in 2003 in an attempt to extract a DNA sample from her bones. The goal was to match her profile with entries in the federal missing person database. Despite these efforts, no matches were found, and her identity remained unknown. A second exhumation took place in 2014. Again, DNA was collected and uploaded to the FBI's missing person database. However, just like the earlier attempt, this search yielded no results, and she continued to be known only by her nickname. Years passed with no progress until a new approach was taken in August 2021. Her DNA profile was uploaded into a public genetic genealogy database, opening up the possibility of identifying her through relatives rather than direct matches. This technique, which had successfully helped solve other cold cases, brought renewed hope to a case that had long gone cold. With the help of this database, investigators began tracing genetic connections through multiple close matches. Genealogical research conducted by Parabon Nanolabs and the Alaska Bureau of Investigation led to a breakthrough. The findings pointed to a potential match, a woman named Robin Pelkey. Based on this possibility, ABI reached out to the Arkansas State Police for assistance. The agency then contacted a very close relative of Robin's and obtained a DNA sample from them, which was sent to the State of Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory in Anchorage for analysis. By September 2021, the results from the kinship DNA analysis confirmed what investigators had hoped. Horseshoe Harriet was indeed Robin Pelkey. Robin was born in 1963 in Denver, Colorado. As a teenager, she moved to Arkansas, but by 1981, she had returned to Alaska to live with her father and stepmother. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, she lived in Anchorage, a city she would remain in until her sudden disappearance. By the early 1980s, she had become unhoused and was living on the streets of Anchorage. However, by late 1982 or early 1983, she had vanished without a trace. The investigators later came to believe that Robin became one of the victims of Robert Hansen, a serial offender who owned a bakery in Anchorage and became infamously known as the Butcher Baker. Hansen was notorious for abducting women, transporting them to isolated areas, either by car or plane, and then hunting them down in the Alaskan wilderness. His methods were both calculated and brutal, turning the remote terrain into his personal hunting ground. In October 1983, Hansen was arrested. The following year, he pleaded guilty to ending the lives of 4 women whose remains had been found in Alaska between 1980 and 1983. During his confessions, Hansen admitted to taking the lives of 17 women. He cooperated with the investigators, revealing the burial sites of several of his victims, including the woman later identified as Robin. Despite this revelation, her true identity remained unknown for many years. Hansen passed away on August 21, 2014, while serving his 461 years imprisonment without parole. In April 2011, the Plano police in Texas began investigating a terrifying indecent assault after a woman reported being awoken by an intruder in her bedroom. A blood-stained pillowcase left behind became the key piece of evidence that sparked a complex investigation spanning over years and multiple cities. On April 2, 2011, the detectives in Plano began investigating an indecent assault case. The victim reported that she was awoken in her bedroom by a man who had placed his hand over her mouth to keep her silent. In an act of resistance, the woman bit the man's hand, causing him to bleed onto the pillowcase. During the assault, the man reached for a pillow, intensifying the victim's fear for her life. In an effort to de-escalate the situation, the woman spoke calmly to her attacker throughout the assault. According to the victim, the man told her he was around 40 years old and entered her home through an unlocked window. He also revealed that he knew her name. After the assault, the man instructed the woman to shower in the dark. The victim described her attacker as a black man with a beard who appeared educated and clean. He mentioned that he had been married, but did not have children. Notably, the attacker expressed remorse for his actions and promised that he would never repeat such behavior. Following the assault, the woman attempted to get the man to leave through the front door, but he instead exited through a back door leading to the backyard. When the police arrived, they collected the pillowcase stained with blood as evidence. From this, the investigators were able to obtain a DNA profile. A few days later, on April 6th, the victim received a phone call from her attacker, who apologized for what he had done. The police traced this call to a Chevron Food Mart at 1320 Gross Road in Mesquite and secured surveillance footage capturing a person using the phone before leaving the scene. Further investigation revealed connections to similar indecent assaults reported in Coppell and Corinth later that year, on September 15th and October 14th respectively. The police noted striking similarities in the attacker's behavior, including knowing the victim's name and making similar statements. DNA analysis confirmed that the male DNA collected from the Coppell victim matched the bloodstained DNA from the Plano pillowcase. Additionally, DNA from the Corinth case matched the profiles from the Coppell and Plano assaults. The authorities also linked this DNA to a suspect involved in a separate attack in Arlington in 2003, establishing a pattern across multiple incidents. The case eventually went cold until it was reopened more than a decade later. The detectives stated in the complaint that their investigation into Jeffrey Lemor Wheat involved genealogical research, online records, social media analysis, and numerous interviews. These efforts collectively led them to identify Wheat as the prime suspect in the series of indecent assaults. This comprehensive approach was crucial in connecting Wheat to the crimes that had remained unsolved for years. On November 12, 2020, the investigators interviewed Wheat's ex-wife, who confirmed he was the father of her child. When shown a 2011 surveillance video from outside the gas station, where the attacker had made a phone call, she immediately recognized Wheat. She cited specific details, including his distinctive walk, shoulder structure, height, and the fact that he wore glasses, all of which convinced her that the man in the footage was indeed Wheat. The authorities then collected a DNA sample from Wheat's child, which was analyzed by a forensic lab. The results indicated that the suspect's DNA profile from the crime scene could not exclude the child as a possible biological relative. This genetic link provided a critical connection between Wheat and the DNA evidence recovered from multiple assault cases, strengthening the case against him. Wheat was born in 1973 and had a troubled history marked by concerning behavior. It is known that he was discharged from the Navy due to inappropriate conduct toward women. Despite this, Wheat maintained a public image as a family man and a good neighbor. However, those who knew him were also aware of compulsions that led him to act in bizarre and troubling ways. Wheat was arrested on January 11, 2021, in cooperation with the Arkansas State Police. Following his arrest, he was transferred to the Collin County Detention Center and held on a $500,000 bond. The affidavit further revealed that Wheat's ex-wife believed that he worked for Brink's Security Customer Service in 2003, the same company used by the victim in the Arlington assault that year. By 2011, she thought he was employed by Fiserv, a financial services firm. The detectives noted that the 2011 victims were connected through an organization that utilized Flagship Merchant Services, a credit card company later acquired by Fiserv. The crimes involved 3 women in their 50s and 60s, all alumni of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, who were assaulted in their homes. Wheat pleaded guilty to 4 cases across Dallas, Collin, Tarrant, and Denton counties. In February 2024, he received life sentences in Collin County for the 2011 Plano assault and in Tarrant County for the 2003 Arlington case. He was sentenced to 30 years in Dallas County for the 2011 Coppell assault and 20 years in Denton County for the 2011 Corinth attack. The daughter of one of Wheat's victims talked about him stealing her mother's self-dignity, self-worth, and feeling of truly being loved. But she said today was victorious, knowing that he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. In the spring of 1971, a 15-year-old left his Boise, Idaho home and was never seen again. Nearly 5 decades later, a search would reignite a dormant investigation. On July 29, 1971, an unidentified deceased juvenile male was found floating in Sneddon Creek, located in the Englewood area of Coos County, Oregon. The condition and positioning of the body led the investigators to nickname the individual Frog Boy. Due to decomposition and the lack of identifying information, the officials were unable to determine the cause of demise. The discovery raised immediate concerns, but without a clear link to a missing person, the case remained unresolved. Nearly 5 decades later, in 2016, a woman's quest to find her father led to a groundbreaking forensic effort that exhumed Frog Boy's remains and unlocked a long-lost identity through DNA. Using a grant from the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office, the team submitted the DNA to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System database and collaborated with Parabon Nanolabs for further analysis. In May 2021, after another 5 years went by, Parabon provided a detailed DNA profile of the unidentified boy. Although the profile did not reveal a name, it produced key insights into ancestry, skin tone, eye and hair color, and facial morphology. This data helped narrow the search and was compared against records from cold cases, missing persons, and genealogical databases. Eventually, the DNA evidence led investigators to the Maxey family. The detectives from Coos County reached out and requested a DNA sample from the biological sister to confirm the match. Once her sample was submitted and analyzed, the authorities were able to confirm that the remains found in 1971 belonged to Winston Arthur Maxey III. Winston was born in 1956 and was a 15-year-old boy from Boise, Idaho. In the spring of 1971, Winston left his home with hopes of finding job opportunities in Oregon. Before departing, he informed his sister that he was heading to Coos Bay and planned to hitchhike his way to the Oregon coast. At the time, Winston was unaware that he had fathered a child in Idaho. The child was later placed for adoption, and Winston continued on his journey, not knowing the life he had left behind. After Winston left Idaho, his family never heard from him again. Days turned into weeks, and eventually into months, with no communication from the teenager. Despite efforts to locate him, there were no clear leads or sightings that could help track his movements after he left for Oregon. In 2016, Lori Merriam, Winston's daughter who was given up for adoption, began a determined search for her biological father, a man whose name was not listed on her birth certificate. Lori had spent her life with unanswered questions about her origins. Her search led her to her biological mother, who shared a painful piece of the past. At just 15 years old, the mother had been forced to give up her baby, and she revealed that the father was another 15-year-old, Winston Maxey. Lori said the following about meeting her biological mother. "When we first met, we hugged, and it was just like instant connection. That was a puzzle piece that was missing and just filled my heart. I cannot even describe the connection." Motivated by the need for answers, Lori created a Facebook page titled, "Where in the World is Winston Maxey?" hoping to connect with anyone who might have known him or had information about his whereabouts. She also filed a missing persons report to make his disappearance official in the national database. However, despite her efforts, she encountered an end. Nobody had seen or heard from Winston since the 1970s. Through her research, Lori learned that Winston had reportedly fallen in with the wrong crowd during his teenage years. He was known to have had a strained relationship with his family and had ultimately run away from home, vanishing without a trace. Thanks to the officials starting to investigating cold cases, Lori found her father. The Coos County officials worked with Winston's family in Idaho to issue a demise certificate and return his remains. For Lori Merriam, it was the end of a long search and the beginning of healing. Frog Boy was finally identified, and the missing persons case was solved. What happened to Winston and how he passed away is still under investigation. In August 1988, skeletal remains were discovered near a dumpster in Sheridan, Colorado. For over 3 decades, the victim was known only as John Doe. In August 1988, skeletal remains of a male were discovered near a dumpster in the 2800 block of West Oxford Avenue. Despite the location of the body, the investigators were unable to uncover information about his hometown or any details explaining why he was in Colorado. The victim was referred to only as John Doe, as authorities struggled to establish his identity. Initially, the investigators believed he might have been a Mexican national, based on limited evidence and assumptions at the time. Despite thorough and tireless efforts from law enforcement, the case remained unresolved for decades, with no suspects or clear leads emerging to explain the circumstances surrounding his demise. In 2020, after 3 decades has passed, the Sheridan Police Department requested the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to review the decades-old case once again. Advances in forensic science allowed the investigators to collect enough genetic material from evidence preserved since 1988 to utilize genetic genealogy technology. This new approach revealed that the victim was of Middle Eastern descent, a breakthrough that shifted the investigation in a new direction. By October 2021, the officials had identified the victim as 36-year-old Akram Bada'an using a combination of DNA evidence and government records. The DNA analysis traced Akram's family origins back to Israel, confirming his Middle Eastern heritage. Sheridan Police Detective Brian Penry emphasized the significance of this breakthrough during a press conference, stating, "The most important thing in this case, aside from giving the victim justice, is giving the victim his name back." CBI analyst Audrey Simpkins added that the team was able to extract sufficient DNA evidence to submit for genetic genealogy testing, which had not been possible before. Chris Wilcox, Senior Chief Deputy District Attorney for the 18th Judicial District, highlighted the dedication of the Cold Case Unit. They were formed in 2013 specifically to address unresolved investigations, assuring the community and victims' families that the search for those responsible for such violent crimes would continue without pause. The case of identifying John Doe is now solved, and the victim has his name back. But the investigation into who ended Akram's life remains active. The officials are urging the public to come forward with any information that might assist the case. Metro Denver Crime Stoppers has been contacted to collect tips, and a reward of $2,000 has been offered to encourage cooperation. Anyone with information is asked to contact Metro Denver Crime Stoppers at 720-913-7867. Tips can also be submitted online at Metro Denver Crime Stoppers website.